Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Mem Aleph. We start with a new Mishnah that we are familiar with already. Kol Chazaka she'en ima ta'ana ena Chazaka. Anytime someone is possessing a land, even for 3 years or more, but does not add to it a claim of how he got it into his possession in a valid way, he has to say, I bought it, I got it as a gift, I inherited it. If he doesn't have a claim of how it came into his possession, then that possession of the land is not considered a presumption of ownership. And we'll give examples. Kesad. Amar lo ma'ata oseh betoch sheli, vehu amar lo, shelo amar li adam davar me'olam, ena chazaka. If the previous owner comes to the squatter and says, what are you doing on my property? And the squatter says, well, I'm here for a long time and nobody told me anything. So, one day I just came and started living here. Nobody said anything for 3 years and therefore it should be mine. No, that doesn't make it yours. You were just a thief. You're just an illegitimate squatter. And so that's not a claim. You have to add a claim of how it came into your possession. So here's some examples. Shemacharta li. Shenatata li b'matana, avicha mecharaha li, avicha netana li b'matana, harezo hazaka. If the possessor lived there for 3 years, and he also said, you sold it to me, he tells the previous owner, or you gave it to me as a gift, or your father sold it to me, or your father gave it to me as a gift. We presume that this owner, the one who's making the claim, his father had it, so he thinks he has it. He's claiming he got it from his father, but this squatter says, no, you never inherited it because your father actually sold it or gave it to me. All these cases are valid claims. He's explaining how it came into his possession, and he had a chazakah. He's there for 3 years, and nobody said anything. So those put together make a valid claim. Now, if someone is on land and he's there for 3 years and he says, I got this as an inheritance from my father. As long as he says that, he does not need any further claim, meaning he doesn't have to explain that how his father got it. He doesn't have to say, well, my father bought it from your father. My father got it as a gift from you. He may not know. A son may not know all the dealings of his father and how all the property of his father got to him, and so he doesn't have to make a claim. As long as he's there for 3 years and he's explaining how he got it legitimately, he inherited it from his father, then that's sufficient, and he does not need any further claim of how his father got it. Good. Pishita. Now we ask, isn't this obvious? Obviously, you can't just go and live on someone's property for 3 years and then all of a sudden claim, oh, this is mine. That's not, obviously that's not valid. That's just stealing. Isn't it obvious that you have to explain, well, how did it come into your hands? Mao de tema. So why does the Mishnah even have to teach this? Because I might have thought as follows. Hai gabra mizban zebana le hai ad'a. Ushtara hava le v'irkas. V'hai de ka'amar hachi. Sabar, I amina mizban zebana li hai ad'a. Amri li achvi shetarach. Hilkach lema le anan. Dilma shetara hava lach v'irkas. Kegon ze petach picha le'ilem. Hu kamashma lan. Here, I might have thought if I didn't have the Mishnah that a person who comes in to court and he says, listen, I have a chazakah, I've been here for 3 years and nobody told me anything, and he doesn't present a claim, I might have thought that it is valid. Why? Because it could be that this guy, the squatter, really did buy the land, he bought it legally, and he had in fact a deed of sale and he lost it. And so why doesn't he say, I bought it from you? Because he thinks, erroneously, but the squatter does think that the law is that if he says, I bought it from you, he says to the claimant, this land, then the court will say, well, if you bought it, show us your deed of sale. And he lost it. So therefore, he doesn't claim that he bought it. He just says, well, I'm living here and no one told me anything. If it was yours, you should have protested. So we might have thought in such a case that the bet din, that the court will prompt him to make the claim and will ask him a question, a leading question, like, well, maybe did you once have a deed? Did you buy it and you had a deed and you lost the deed? And then he says, we'll prompt him to say that. And then the possessor will say, oh yes, that's true. And so we might have thought that in such a case, the bet din should assist him and open the mouth for the mute. If someone is mute, they can't speak. So we try to play charades and we, guess what he's saying. We say, oh, did you mean this? And we might have thought, because there are cases where a Bet Din will prompt someone who doesn't know how to make a proper claim himself, so we might have thought that here also we make the claim on his behalf. Kamash Malan, that's why the Mishnah teaches that we don't do that. So basically, it's obvious that if someone comes and says, listen, I just started living here, I never bought it, I never got it as a gift, I lived here for 3 years, no one said anything, and therefore it's mine, obviously that's stealing and it wouldn't be his. So why does the Mishnah have to teach it? Because I might have thought that there could be a case where someone really bought it, but doesn't want to admit that he bought it because he doesn't have the deed. And he thinks that he's going to have to produce the deed if he says so. So we might have thought that we will provide the claim for him, prompt him to say the claim, and therefore the Mishnah teaches we don't do that. If the claimant, the possessor, doesn't make the claim himself, then we do not make a claim for him. He has to come and say, I've been here for 3 years and I bought it. I lost the deed. It's been 3 years. I don't have to hold on to the deed. That's the chidush of the Mishnah. We have a mnemonic, Ayin Nun Bet. The Ayin stands for Rav Anan, who's the first story. We're going to see a few stories now. Rav Anan shekal bidka be'ad'eh. Azal hadar guda be'ad'eh dechabre. Atal kamed Rav Nachman. Amar lezil hadar. Rav Anan, he had a field and he had a wall with that separated his field and his neighbor's field. However, a torrent came, some water came and swept away the wall. So he built the wall again, but he rebuilt it by mistake on the land of his neighbor. He went a few feet into the land of his neighbor. It wasn't so clear where the border is. He wasn't trying to steal. He made a mistake in his calculation and he put it in the wrong spot. After he built the wall, then they realized that the wall's in the wrong place. So they came to Rav Nachman to adjudicate, and Rav Nachman told Rav Anan, you have to go and rebuild it. Go put it back where it was. You can't just take land from your neighbor. So Rav Anan has a claim. Veha achazikili. He says, I have a chazakah. Now he wasn't there for 3 years. So what does it mean that he has a chazakah, that he has a presumption of ownership? Amale keman, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Ishmael damri, kol befanav le'altar haveh chazaka le'tilcheta kevatayhu. And so Rav Nachman says, what do you mean you have a chazaka? Who are you following the halacha like? Are you following Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Ishmael? They say that if you do something right in front of your neighbor, and he sees it and doesn't say anything, then you can make a chazakah immediately. The 3 years is if the prior owner is not around. He's in a different city, a different part of the city. He's away, and he doesn't. So we need 3 years for him to get the message. But if he's standing right there, then it makes a chazakah right away. And he says, my neighbor, he saw me building this wall. He was right there in front of me. He didn't say anything. And that's why I have a chazakah immediately. That's Rav Anan's claim. So Rav Nachman says, is that what you're doing? You're following Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Ishmael, who say that you can make a claim immediately if the neighbor is right in front of you. It's true that they say that, but halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Ishmael, and therefore, sorry, Rav Anan, this is not a valid claim. So Rav Anan continues to press. Amar le'veha achil ta'ata v'saya'a beguda behadai. Rav Anan says it's not only that my neighbor didn't protest, but in which case I would have to rely on Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Ishmael. It's more than that. He actually waived his rights to these few feet. Let's say, he brought Rav Anan built his wall, let's say 10 feet into his neighbor, and the neighbor waived his right to those 10 feet of his land. How do I know? Because he actually helped me build the wall. I was carrying the bricks, putting the cement on, and my neighbor, he's such a nice guy, and he was helping me to rebuild my wall. He felt bad that my wall was wiped away. So the fact that he built the wall on his own land means that he waives his rights to that land that's on the other side, and he's okay with me putting my wall on his land. Amar le-mechila beta'uti. But Rav Nachman says, no, this waiving of his rights is by mistake. At kufach yadat la'abadet Ki hechi da'at la hava yadat hu nameh la hava yada. You yourself, this is Rav Nachman, the judge, tells Rav Anan, if you knew where the proper boundary was, you would not have built the wall in the wrong spot. Rav Anan's an honest man. He's a great sage. So obviously he would have put it in the right place. By mistake, he miscalculated, put it in the wrong place. You yourself, Rav Anan, would not have put it in the wrong place if you realized. So just like you didn't know, your neighbor also didn't know. That's why he was helping you. He thought it was in the right spot. Later on, turns out they realized that it was in the wrong spot. So he didn't waive his rights. He didn't realize that it was in the wrong spot to waive his rights. If he knew it was in the wrong spot and it was clear and he still helped you, okay, then that would be a different story. And so therefore Rav Nachman says, sorry, you have to take down that wall and you have to rebuild it in the correct spot. Another story. Rav Kahana, shekal bitka be'ar'eh, azal hadar guda be'ar'ah deladideh. Rav Kahana, same thing happened to him. Some water came and swept through his field and moved the boundary marker, moved the wall that was the boundary marker between him and his neighbor. And so he rebuilt the wall, but he put it in the wrong spot. He put it a few feet into his neighbor's boundary. They came to Rav Yehuda to be the judge. Azil aiti tere sahadeh, chad amar tarte usyata al, vechad amar telat usyata al. Amar le zil shalem tarte migo telat. And so the neighbor brought witnesses, and he brought two witnesses. One of the witnesses says that the wall is two rows of planting, two rows into my field. And the other one said it was 3 rows into that neighbor's field. So now these two witnesses, they contradict. One says that Rav Kahana stole, inadvertently, obviously, he just mistook the calculation. But one says that Rav Kahana's wall is 2 rows into his field, and one said 3 rows into his field. So now Rav Yehuda has to base his ruling on these contradictory witnesses. So what was his ruling? Amale zil shalem tarte migotelat. So Rav Yehuda rules that Rav Kahana has to pay out 2 of the 3 rows. He has to pay for 2 out of the 3 rows that he took from his neighbor's property. So because the witnesses contradict, he can't make him pay 3 because only one witness for the 3rd row. But both witnesses agree that he took at least 2 rows wrongly, and therefore he has to pay 2 rows. Okay, so that was Rav Yehuda's ruling. Now, Rav Kahana, it's always dangerous to be a judge for another rabbi, because now Rav Kahana challenged Rav Yehuda's ruling. Amale Kiman, Kedebi Shimon ben Elazar. Says, who are you following this halacha like that you said? That you take the common denominator between the 2 single witnesses. All right, how did you decide that? After all, the witnesses are contradictory, really. So maybe throw them both out because at least one of them is lying, and you really don't have 2 witnesses. So who did you follow for this halacha? Must be you followed Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the following braita. Let's quote this long braita, the Tanya. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Lo nechluku bet Shammai ubet Hillel al shete kitei adim, shachat omedet maneh v'achat omedet matayim, sheyesh bichlal matayim maneh. So he says that when the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar interprets the following machloket between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, he says they did not disagree when you have 2 sets of witnesses, right? 4 witnesses altogether. 2 witnesses, one set says this guy owes the other guy 100. And another set of witnesses, another 2 people says, no, he owes him 200. In that case, for sure, he has to pay 100 because 100 is included within 200. And in this case, you have 2 witnesses that says, this guy owes the other guy 100. So you can use those 2 witnesses. Now the fact that there's another 2 witnesses that have a different number, and so you might think, well, it's contradictory, right? And therefore you throw the whole thing out. Well, it's not like they're contradicting each other regarding the place or the time, if they were contradicting each other regarding something fundamental like that, it's either this or that, this person or that person, well then there would be contradictory witnesses and no, you wouldn't pay anything. But here they're agreeing on the time and the place and the people. They're only disagreeing regarding the number, and when it comes to numbers, the lower one is included within the higher one. And so we assume that the one that says the higher number, maybe they just made a mistake in the number, but surely they would agree that he owes at least 100. So therefore, we don't consider this contradictory witnesses, and there are 2 witnesses that says he owes 100, so everybody would agree that he has to pay 100. So now this is continuing Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's interpretation of the machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. So where do they argue? Al kat achat. שאחת אומר מנה ואחד אומר 200 שבית שמאי אומרים נחלקה עדותן ובית הלל אומרים יש בכלל 200 מנה. They're arguing when there's only one set of witnesses, 2 people altogether. One of the witnesses says this guy owes 100 to the other, and the other witness says he owes 200. In that case, Bet Shammai says their testimony is contradictory. So we don't have even 2 witnesses that say the same thing. So therefore, he doesn't have to pay anything because in the previous case, at least you had 2 witnesses that says you owe 100. Here, no, the 2 witnesses don't say the same thing. So you throw the whole thing out. Bet Hillel says, no, we can apply the principle here also that 100 is within 200. Even though you don't have 2 witnesses saying the same exact thing, we can take these 2 witnesses and put them together and just assume that the guy who said 200, he made a mistake. He thought it was 200, but really he is testifying also to at least 100, and so you can put them together. And so, to go back to our story, Rav Kana is asking Rav Yehuda, are you following the halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? Because look what you did, that is that exact same thing. And you took one witness that says 2 feet, and one witness that says 3 feet, 3 rows. And you put them together, and you took the lowest common denominator of 2. So it seems like you're following Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's interpretation of Bet Hillel, that Bet Hillel would permit taking 1 witness and 1 witness. If so, here's my problem. Amar le veha maitina lach igarta mima'ara ba te'en halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Kana says, I can bring you a letter that came from Eretz Yisrael that says we do not follow the halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So it's true, I agree that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar interpreted Bet Hillel in that way, but I have a letter that says that we don't follow that halacha. Now there is, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is not the only interpretation of Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai here. The other interpretation says that even Bet Hillel would only permit when it's 2 and 2. And Bet Shammai would say, no, if 2 and 2 are contradictory and we throw each other out. According to that interpretation, nobody, not even Bet Hillel, would permit adding 1 and 1. So Rav Kana thinks the halacha should be more machmir, and you throw out 1 and 1 even according to Bet Hillel. And according to that, Rav Kana says, listen, my neighbor has no witnesses. He has 1 witness that says 2. 1 witness that says 3. These witnesses are contradictory. I don't have to give anything. I dispute the whole claim, and I don't want to pay anything. So he seems to have a good point. And the final verdict is, Amar le lechitete. So Rav Yehuda says, okay, if you bring the letter, then I'll change my ruling. But I haven't seen such a letter. So Rav Kana, he didn't have the letter in his hand right then. Maybe he saw the letter one time, but where is the letter? So Rav Yehuda said, listen, if you bring the letter, then I'll change my mind. But I never saw that letter, I don't have it, and I think halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and therefore my ruling stands, you have to pay him for 2 rows. Another story. Hahu gabra dedar bekashta be'alita arba shene. Ata mare debeta ashkeche. Amar le mai ba'it behai beta. There was a certain guy, a squatter, who was living in the upper story of a home in the city of Kashta. And he's living there for 4 years, and nobody ever told him anything. The owner of the house comes and finds him there. I guess he was away for a while. And he says, what are you doing in this house? This is my house, right? Get out. Amar le mipilanya zebinta dizbana minach. The squatter says, I bought it from Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Cohen bought it from you. the original owner. And I've been here for 4 years, so he has a chazakah and he has a ta'ana. The ta'ana, however, is not that I bought it from you directly, I bought it from that guy who bought it from you. Is that a valid ta'ana if it's indirect? Ata lekamed Rabbi Chiya, amar le, I it lach sahadeh, tedar ba ihu dizbanat mineh, va'afilu chad yoma, okimna lach la bidach, ve'ila la. So the case came to Rabbi Chiya to be the judge, and Rabbi Chiya says to the squatter, if you can bring witnesses that that guy, Mr. Cohen, that you bought it from, lived there, even if you only have proof that he lived there for 1 day, then I'll give it to you. But otherwise not. See, if you say, I bought it from the original owner, fine, you have a chazakah, and that's certainly a valid ta'ana. Now you explain the chain of custody, how you got it. But the fact that you bought it from Mr. Cohen, who's Mr. Cohen? Maybe he never owned it. He was never the legitimate owner in the first place. So you bought it from someone who didn't own it. So that's not a full ta'ana. Now you don't need 100% proof that Mr. Cohen bought it. I don't need to see his deed of sale or that he was there for 3 years. But give me 1 day, right? Give me proof that Mr. Cohen was there for at least 1 day living there. And then I will accept your claim that Mr. Cohen must have bought it from the original owner, because that's why he was living there for 1 day, and then you say you bought it from him, and you have a chazakah, then fine. But otherwise, not. Amarav, hava yatibna kameh de chabibi, ve'amri le, v'chi en adam asui likach v'limkor balayla. Rav says, I was sitting before Chabibi, my friend. He means his uncle. That's Rabbi Chiya is his uncle. Just like we say Dod. Dod means uncle, but also comes from Dodi, my beloved. Because people are very close to their uncles. Uncles were like second fathers, taking care of their nephews. So Rav says, I was learning in front of Rabbi Chiya, and I told him, I argued about this, and said, well, doesn't sometimes a person buy and sell within 1 night? Sometimes people flip a property right away. They buy it, and they don't live in it, right? They might buy it at 9 p.m., and then they know someone who would want to buy it from them for a higher price, and by 10 p.m. they flip it and sold it to someone else. So the fact that you can't bring that the fact that the person, Mr. Cohen, didn't live there for 1 night isn't proof that he didn't own it. It could be he owned it and he flipped it right away within the same night and never lived there even for a day. So Rav is arguing that he should not have to bring proof that the Mr. Cohen was living there for 1 day. וחזיתה לדעתה, אי אמר לה כמי דידי, זה בן המינך מהמן. מגודעי באי אמר לה, ענה זה בנתה מינך. However, Rav says, Rabbi Chiya did not agree with my question. I saw what his opinion was, right, as they discussed it, and Rabbi Chiya would agree that if the squatter says that the original owner sold it in front of me to Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Cohen sold it to me, then that's fine. He would be believed because it has a migo. He could, if he was lying, then the squatter could have said, I bought it from you directly. Since he could have said that, then fine. He can also say, I was there when you, the original owner, sold it to Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen sold it to me. That would be fine if he was there and he saw it. So you need that. Or, if he wasn't there, then he has to bring proof that Mr. Cohen was there for one day. You need one or the other. But if you have nothing, if you just say, I bought it from Mr. Cohen. How did Mr. Cohen get it? I don't know. I thought he bought it from you, but I don't know. I wasn't there, and I have no proof that he lived there even for 1 day. And no, that's not sufficient. Rabbi Chiya says you need something more than just saying, I bought it from Mr. Cohen, who bought it from you. Amar Rava, kevated Rabbi Chiya mistabera dekatane, haba mishum Yerusha eno serich ta'ana, ta'anahu de la ba'e, ha're'aya ba'e. Rava, later than Rava's first generation, Rava is a 4th generation in Bavel, and he says later on that it makes sense what Rabbi Chiya said, because I have a proof from our Mishnah. The last clause in our Mishnah says, if someone has a claim that he inherited it, a land. He is there for 3 years, and he says, I inherited it from my father. The Mishnah says he does not need a claim. He doesn't have to explain how his father received it. So we can infer, okay, he doesn't need a claim of how his father got it from the original owner, but he does need a proof that it belonged to his father, he has to bring something. He has to say, right, my father lived there for, I have witnesses that my father lived there for this certain amount of time, or something like that. So we can see he doesn't need a ta'ana, but he does need proof. And just like in our Mishnah, someone who says, I got it from my father and I have a chazakah, has to bring proof that his father owned it. So too, in a case of someone who buys property from some other guy, from a third party, Mr. Cohen, it's not sufficient. He has to also bring proof that Mr. Cohen owned it, that he lived there for one day at least. Otherwise, he doesn't need a ta'ana. He doesn't have to be there and for that original sale from that Mr. Cohen bought it from the original owner. But he needs proof that Mr. Cohen had it. So that's a proof for Rabbi Chiya's ruling over here. But then we dispute what Rava said. We're not disputing the fact that the halacha is like Rabbi Chiya, but we're just saying this is not necessarily a proof from this Mishnah. Now maybe when the Mishnah says in the case of inheritance that it's enough to have a chazakah and you don't need a claim, meaning you don't have to explain how your father got it from that guy, maybe when it says no ta'ana, means nothing. You don't need a proof and you don't need a ta'ana. The Mishnah just put it in that way because in the previous cases in the Mishnah it said that you need a claim, and now it's saying, well, listen, if you're an inheritor, then you don't need a claim. But in fact, you can infer from that you do need a proof. You don't need anything. If you're there for 3 years, and you say, I inherited from my father. How did my father get it? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't have to know. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't even need proof that his father lived there. And so you can't derive from our Mishnah that someone who buys it needs to bring proof that the seller had lived there. Or another way to refute Rava's proof is to admit that, in fact, in the case of inheritance, yes, if I say I inherited this land and I've been living here, I have to bring some proof that my father actually owned it. Yes, that's true for a case of inheritance. But a case of a sale is different from inheritance, because when it comes to a sale, a person does not give money, throw away money for nothing. If I claim that I bought it from Mr. Cohen, so then the presumption is I paid him $1,000. I wouldn't give him $1,000 unless I checked first that Mr. Cohen is the rightful owner. I wouldn't go to some random person and say, here, I'm going to buy the Empire State Building from you. That doesn't make sense. You want to check to make sure that that person really owns it. So if a person says, I bought it from Mr. Cohen, we assume that he checked that Mr. Cohen was the rightful owner, and therefore he doesn't need any further proof. Even though in the Mishnah, in the case of inheritance, because the inheritor did not pay any money, he just sat there. One day his father died, and he inherited the property, and so he assumed that it belonged to his father, but he never checked into it. So it could very well be that in the Mishnah, you can make that inference. You don't need a claim, but you need proof that it was your father's. But in the case of a sale, you wouldn't need proof, and therefore there is no proof from the Mishnah for the Bichiya's ruling, which was in a case of a sale. So either way, we are rejecting Rava's proof from the Mishnah for the Bichiya's halacha. Lastly, Ibai lehu nir'a bo mai. Now it says, Rabbi Chiya says, you need proof that this Mr. Cohen lived there for one day. The question is, what if we didn't see him sleeping there? We didn't see him eating there. We just saw him on the property. He was walking around on the property. He was seen on it, but he wasn't using it. He wasn't consuming it. Is that sufficient? Amar Abaya hihi. Abaya says that's sufficient. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter what he's doing on the property. If he's on the property, then that's sufficient to claim, I have witnesses, I saw Mr. Cohen walking around on the property, and that's sufficient to prove that it was his, and I bought it from him. That's good enough. Rava Amar, Abid Inish, Tesayad Ar'eh Vela Zabin. Rava disagrees, and says sometimes a person might survey a land, but that's not his, and he doesn't even end up purchasing it, right? Sometimes you might go on you think you're looking at some land, you want to assess, how big is this land? I want to know. Maybe you're thinking of buying it. Maybe you want to compare it to something else. And so a person may go and survey land and walk around on it, but end up not buying it and is actually not the owner. And so just because you saw Mr. Cohen walking around on the land one day, maybe he was considering buying it, but didn't buy it. That's not sufficient. in order to prove your claim, I was there for 4 years, and bring proof that the guy I bought it from, Mr. Cohen, I saw him sleep there. I saw him take some produce from there. Okay, then that's good. That means that he actually lived there. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.